And so when I attempt to recall home, it becomes a collage of tangible things, a quilt of familiar sensations and emotions. And it is always something that I must consciously fracture and conjoin over and over again to make sense out of it. And as all things bleed into each other, my idea of home is very closely tied to my idea of my own self. And in an attempt at defining my own identity, this project comes into fruition. Spare, quiet, and evocative, Sidney Lampayan's The Body Is You, told through the format of a short online game with varying choices and multiple endings, delves into the importance of the body and physical vessel, and how memory and self are intimately entwined with the somatic, underscoring one's anatomy as the utmost interface with reality and being. The artist uses these experiences as a way to rejoin her memory and body in a process of self healing and learning. As someone who struggles with body and self image, Lampayan shares, I've had days where I wanted to become a spirit without a vessel, to remove myself from my physical appearance. This story mirrors my struggle with acceptance and coming to terms with my identity and body, told in short, sporadic passages and illustrations. The images included in the project um, have been produced by Althea Abesamis and Gab Villos. Nelvie Daliva's Galugarin takes place inside a house created in a virtual setting wherein the guests search its every nook, venturing to the physical, private, and most intimate spaces. Concurrently, these sites also hold the traces of persons who have once inhabited and inscribed the very same spaces. This search leads us to continual discoveries and revelations about the persona's own body and her many identities, molding her into who she is now and who she is still growing up to be. And yeah, before we finally hear from the four artists, let me just quickly introduce them. Please say hi to the audience once you're called. Mary Nelvie Daliva, a,
Hi,
mem-
hi po. Hello
a
po.
member of Kuwit from Taguig, is made up of story fragments herself. She likes to take up as much space as possible. Sidney Lampayan is a creative writing student from Los Baños. She likes math, science, and dissing celebrities, except Bruno Mars. Her writing style consists of short prose, often fragmented. Her current interests include Sims 4, window shopping, and searching Twitter for any content about Bruno Mars. She really loves him, okay? She's going to marry him.
Hello
Bo-
po.
Buwan Lila Sayajon is a creative writing major who is currently interested in exploring other forms of art besides text. Other than that, Buwan is also interested in food, dogs, traveling, Genshin, and trying to fix a proper sleeping schedule.
Hello po.
Sophia Beatriz Reyes is a Kuwait member and enemy of the state from Antipolo. She likes commuting, keepsakes of people and places she can carry around, and collective ownership. When she isn't taking one of her long naps, you can find her with her watercolors or sewing kit, singing whatever is stuck in her head at the moment.
Hi po.
All right, so there. We just like to thank again everyone who's taken the time to join us tonight in this conversation. Maraming salamat sa directors ng Philippine High School for the Arts at sa administration, sa lahat ng kawani na tumulong sa amin para mailuwal itong apat na proyektong ito. Salamat din kay Bernice Sandejas na tumulong sa social media promotions. Ayun, so kayo na muna.
Si Nelvie, di ba mauna?
Okay. Would you be playing the behind the scenes video
Yes,
first,
yes.
or do I? Okay. So yeah. So the four artists would like to share to you short clips documenting what went on during the during their production. Ayun, so behind the scenes documentation. So
Sabay na din po siya sa introductions namin.
okay.
Apo.
Hi, ako po si Nelvie. For now, I guess I'm going to briefly introduce my project. Yung pinaka-dominant na iniisip ko during the process of making my project is just combining these habits and tendencies I have brought since my childhood, and combining these habits and tendencies I have is actually one of the tendencies and habits that I also have. Kasi growing up, I was fond of always making these little gifts to my family, to my parents. So this project resembles those gifts that I was fond of giving to them. Ayun, tapos my project focuses on my childhood and my family. Ayun. Ayun po muna. Yay.
Okay, Sydney?
So the video will be played by Sophie first.
Na-freeze ata si Sidney.
Oo nga. Tsaka na-eject siya kanina sa meeting. I think she has unstable connection. While we're waiting for her, maybe we could move on to Buwan's video. And then we could hear from Sydney later.
Sasabayan ko na lang po yung video kasi medyo mahaba siya. 1 minute. So yung pagbuo ng paghawi, more or less, na-introduce na po from Sir Christian's statement earlier. But in summary, it's an experimental project that again utilizes text, video, and image, and it revolves around themes of memory, identity, and the reconstruction and recollection of these. These are based on my experiences, or how my childhood was shaped. I grew up always having to move from one place to another, so this project came into fruition in an attempt to come to terms or negotiate with that kind of experience. It's I based the project on Tumblr as a platform because I wanted it to look like the persona's stream of thought, of consciousness. And ayan, thank you very much.
Salamat, Buwan. Maybe you could hear now from Sidney.
Hello po, sir. Sorry po, na-disconnect po kanina. So just to explain my project, I'm gonna give a bit of background. Like nahirapan talaga ako when I was first conceptualizing the project, as I had intended for the project as a way for me to express, like what I said in my beginning statement. It was meant to express my own relationship with my own memories and my identity in my body. And I had gone through so many different mediums at first as a way to show the work. First, I was planning to make a video, and then I planned to make websites. But at the end, I settled on an online sort of visual novel-esque format as an online game, since I've always been very interested in how when I play like these guilty pleasure romance games, I always get to assume an avatar of someone who is perfect and desirable, but they're also invisible, and that process of playing as an invisible character helped me in my own way to connect my somatic trauma and my own memories and dealing with my self-images. And I was hoping that was able to be construed through this online gaming format. That's it for now po.
Thank you, Sidney. And finally, Sophie.
Hi po. Let me just stream the video while I talk. Yeah. So hello po. Yeah, I'm Sophie, and I'm from Antipolo. In case I haven't made it clear yet. And these are some close-ups of some of the images used for the virtual room. Here's like some research as well as some things from fieldwork. These are tapes that I found when I was looking for artifacts that I could use for the project. And I decided to go with this because whether or not it was a conscious decision for me, I've always been drawn to talking about my childhood, and I always find that I can't talk about my childhood without talking about where it all happened, and especially since yes, as I've said, I've lived in the same place for all my life, and yeah, ayun na po muna sa ngayon.
All right. Salamat. So maybe we could begin by someone from the group perhaps could share how you came up with the idea, like the general idea for the No True North exhibitions, the title even. So how did it lead to that? What were the general influences, or what triggered this collective project? Anyone?
Um, Actually po, the collective concept was after we had already come up with our own individual concepts. We parang when kasi our entire batch has a collective event called Durungawan, which parang is a series of all the exhibitions by
Yeah.
different majors in the batch. So there came up a need for us to um find a common theme in all of our projects. So we talked about it and we realized na ayun nga po, coincidentally,
Yeah.
all of our projects in one way or another deal with the relationship of the body or the self with the space. Yun.
Okay. Although at the same time, no, kahit na, yun nga, parang very serendipitous yung intersections ng apat na projects, or even perhaps the overlap with the senior thesis exhibitions, no, na creative writing seniors. At the same time, we know na there's more to it. There's more to that serendipity, right? There's more to that coincidence. No? So perhaps you could share um, at this point what you could reflexively identify as factors um, and influences that have shaped your preoccupations as a group. Like, is there anything about the courses, for example, the readings, the modules, or something specific to your generation, perhaps? I don't know. So, and again, siguro just to iterate, no, very recurring yung ano, no, again, body, identity, self-image, no, place, and various senses of history, ano, relating to one's sense of self, and the exploration of space. Yes, Sophie, go ahead, please.
Uh, I think yeah, it also has to do with the modules and the lessons, pati po yung mga readings. Like throughout our 4 years in junior high school. And I think another reason why we've decided to go with this is because these are themes and topics that we discuss among each other, that we're comfortable enough to share with each other and converse about. Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else would like to add to that?
I
Yes,
also
one.
think po, considering the time that we are in right now, which is the pandemic, and just forced us to stay in our houses or places that we grew up in, there came up a need to um, kind of redefine
Okay.
things that we already know. Especially since yung age group po namin is like parang going into young adult now, where we're still like figuring things out. So it makes a lot of sense that these are
Yeah.
the kind of themes that we try to explore.
Pinag-uusapan pa lang na Denise, Victoria, and I were talking last night. She's here, by the way. No, we were just talking last night. No, yung ang lungkot lang dun sa tumapat dun sa mga teenagers na dapat heyday nila, ganyan, ano, na peak ng youth, ganyan. Tapos biglang 2-year lockdown, no, 2-year na pandemic, bawal lumabas. But yeah, I guess that point one is a good seg to the next question. Ano na, parang especially with the three projects by Buwan, by Sophie, and by Nelvie. Ano, these four projects are more actively informed by nostalgia or some impulse to regress, no, to return, and like you said, redefine. Um, and also, this is transitioning to the question pertaining to um, the school, no, the institution, and the fact that it is a boarding school on Mount Makiling, no. Siguro yung tanong, um, ano kaya yung import nung like for a long time you had to leave home, right, and spend most of your most of your time in school, no, studying your craft, and you're compelled to, you know, constantly interact with fellow young artists, ganyan, ano, and we also know how removed, no, our milieu is from the bigger milieu, right? And in a way, despite the constant recurring emphasis of the school, no, na this is about heritage, this is about tracing our roots, sustaining our traditions, etc., and all that. Kung ano man yun, ano, at the same time, the very act of transposing you from, you know, from your childhoods, no, to this new context, which is not regular at all, right, is also a kind of uprooting, right, a kind of the contextualization, no, in a way also. So how does that contribute to this impulse to return, to reassess, to um, do some sort of very intimate inventory, no, sa kanya-kanya yung proyekto. And as already preempted by Buwan, how does that also um, respond, no, to the more recent situation, which is binalik kayo bigla doon, and you're saturated by, you know, the people doon sa mga kasama yung pamilya, no, you're again saturated by the presence of family members. Sydney, please go ahead.
Personally, for me, my experience with staying in Makiling and then being thrust back home in the pandemic, being in Makiling, we're always surrounded by people. It doesn't have to be my roommates or my major mates. It just feels like Makiling is just a community-based place, and while that's good and like it's good to foster relationships among the community, there are times where like people, I like sometimes me, I feel like sometimes if you're estranged by the community or you don't have that kind of time or you don't have that kind of ability to foster those relationships, being in such a populated area or such a community area might leave you less sure about yourself and your own identity, and thus being returned back to your home might signal just a way to find yourself.
Salamat, Sydney. Any other related points? Buwan, go ahead.
I also think that because all of the students in PHSA experience this uprooting and disconnecting from the environments that they grew up in, and I think that obviously has a lot of effect on the kind of art that we make. And I guess being in Makiling, it feels like it's actually very difficult to be aware of that.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
to be able to confront that properly. So I guess ayun din po yung kaya mahirap yung adjustment pabalik kasi there's a lot of realizations after na-remove ko na sa isolated na community sa PHSA because it really is very isolated from the rest of the world.
Okay. Kung may gusto pa ba before I proceed to the next related questions related? Yes, Nelvie, please go ahead.
As for me po, also speaking personally, nung when I was first in Makiling po, I was exposed to all these kinds of different cultures and interactions with people with fellow young student artists from different parts of the country. Tapos nakakabigla lang din po yun kasi ayun, I was very sheltered. Tapos wait, sorry. I was very sheltered. Tapos I guess being in Makiling, I was able to find this sense of individuality and like distance myself from my home. Kasi ayun, yeah, it's also like physically away from my house, and like ayun, isolated din siya. And ayun, as already said, it allowed for me to ayun, to like have this parang reassessment of myself, and yun.
Para siyang naghahawa ng clearing for you to be able to um, be more reflexive about yourself and be able to define yourself further independent of your family, I suppose, no? Or your previous associations. Sophie, please go ahead.
And I just like to add with that. I guess especially for um, for people who aren't very like one said, who aren't very conscious of the time that has passed. Um, when we got shuttled back here, um, there's also that sort of realization that we're not picking up from where we left off when we got to Makiling, and there's uh, there's actually like a lot of these little changes that you wouldn't be able to notice in the weekends that you're home, the 1 week to 2 month breaks po.
Okay. And siguro um, parallel to those qualities that we already identified in the 4 projects, no. Karugtong din nun yung siguro yung salita ng estrangement, no, at yung pag-insist at the same time sa connection or sa kinship or sa affinity, no. And hindi necessarily with another person sa lahat ng pagkakataon, minsan as in Sidney's project's case, no, it's coming to terms with oneself, no. So but before that, na-estrange din siya sa sarili niya, no. So there's that constant tug between kanina, 'di ba, parang yung tug between distance and saturation, or distance and proximity. And in relation to that, no, yung tug ng estrangement at affinity, no, or kinship or connection across all projects, no. So maybe you could comment on that, especially in relation to um we have this stereotype, no, ascribed to writers na very solitary, sa lahat, 'di ba? Parang parati naman yan for art disciplines, no, but other disciplines are seen as more collaborative or more social, no. And there's this very romanticized notion of the artist na very solitary, loner, ganyan, emo, no. So in relation to that bit about estrangement and affinity, how like as creative writing majors um, at the PHSA and in your respective communities, in your respective milieus, how does these notions of affinity and estrangement come to play, and how does this inform your practice also, no?
I understand where these stereotypes come from po, because ayun nga, writing is a quote-unquote solitary pursuit, and a lot of I guess there's a stark difference in the process that goes into writing as in other art forms. I mean, all art forms work in different ways, pero ayun nga, writing has its own economy, and a lot of it demands parang solitude or pero also it is, I think personally, it's very dangerous to parang make it seem like it's essential to have this disconnect when it comes to writing. Na- but I guess it seems like a small idea but it gives birth to a lot of
Yes.
harmful or problematic practices in relating to writing na kasi ayun nga, as to all art practices, it's very important na hindi ka disconnected from the world that you're taking from. So ayun po.
All right. Salamat, Buwan. May iba pa ba? Yeah, so Sophie?
On that, I remember attending this talk a year ago, I think, and there was this speaker who's also a writer, and they lived in another country at the time. Hindi ko lang po maalala yung pangalan. But what they said stuck with me, and they said nostalgia or inherited nostalgia has the tendency to simplify and idealize when you're writing about the place that you are in. And then they asked, how do you contend with imaginary images of places without flattening and possibly
Okay.
writing something else entirely? And I think it also says a lot how starkly different our projects would have been if we decided to pursue this. Pero nasa PHSA pa rin po kami. I mean, sa Makiling. And I guess how even just to me at least, even just the fact that we're physically closer to home, or the places that we're writing about, already brings the project closer to ourselves as well.
Okay. I guess on that note, Sophie, itanong ko na siguro yung because the space is an element in all four projects is already a given, so I guess the more difficult the more difficult issue to articulate would be how you guys apprehended place, no? Because kumbaga, like for example, in Nelvie's case and in Sidney's case, and yes, and so in kay Sophia din, very evident yung very performative, no, yung pag-explore ng space, no? It's very inherent to the project, no, yung pine-perform, no, yung pag-navigate ng space, no? But when it comes to how you apprehended place, whatever place means to you for your project, no? Ano kaya yung masasabi niyo doon? And I guess this is especially difficult for Nelvie and Sidney because their projects are the way their projects constructed space na mas deliberately abstract and metaphysical, I suppose, no? So ano masasabi niyo, no, sa notion ng place, no, or kung ano yung place ang binabalikan o anong place ang fina-fabricate ninyo sana, no? At kay Buwan at Sophie naman, na-preempted na rin nung kakabahagi lang ni Sophia, no? Yung flattening, no, yung pag-stylize, no, yung pagsasalin, no? So could you share some insights that came up, no, during the time you were translating the respective places that are dear to you and that you thought were pertinent to your projects? Ayun, yung relasyon ninyo sa Lunan, no, at sa milieu. At ano yung nawawala, no? What gets lost in the translation, what is deliberately omitted, what is deliberately distorted, and what is your relationship with I guess pag-romanticize, no, ng Lunan, what ano yung masasabi niyo patungkol doon?
I guess that's not really because I've from the beginning po, I decided to make my project a recalling our collection of this place, across different periods of time as well. Um, from how I knew it when I was smaller, tapos kung papaano po siya mula sa mga kwento binabahagi sa akin ng mga kakilala ko dito, family members, everything. And I think there's I'm not entirely sure about this one actually, but I feel like there's sort of more room for me to not be so preoccupied with that because of the medium I chose as well, um, and um, also because I'm working with a collaborator, and it's always been like an interesting thing to me. At the jams here, um, it's always been interesting to me.
Hi.
Hi po. That yeah, I'm writing about something very specific to the place in which I'm in,
Exactly.
and at the jams from Dumaguete, and
Exactly.
so um, it it was really interesting during the brainstorming part po. Um, we we continued to make it just we were actually initially supposed to go with images from my fieldwork around, and also images grabbed from Google Maps. Um, but yeah, we settled with illustrations, which made it even more, um, which made it closer to a space than an actual concrete place. I think.
Yeah.
Ayun na po muna sa ngayon.
Ayun. Maybe Mirjam or Sophie could comment on this, no? Because yun nga, nabanggit mo na rin, Sophie, no, that Mirjam is from the Visayas, and I presume limited yung familiarization niya sa Antipolo, no? And you had to function as a kind of mediator for Antipolo towards mapping and executing the fictive Antipolo in your project. No? So, siguro, ano na din, patungkol na rin sa collaborative process, parang gaano kalaki din yung allowance mo? Like, na allowance na binigay mo, or parang nag-concede ka, ayun, yung concessions, no? Concessions. Sa collaborator, kay Mirjam, no? Na inevitably may magbabago, or inevitably may productivity doon sa hindi niya alam about Antipolo, no? There's something productive in that, no? Doon sa hindi niya pagiging acquainted or intimate with Antipolo. And ayun, maybe both of you could weigh in. So allowances and concessions, no? And from Mirjam's end, I suppose, no, yung mga kailangan mong i-assert, no, beyond the technical, no, sa creative process, things you had to assert, at the expense, of course, no, na magbabago yung original vision nung author. Any thoughts? Hindi mo kailangan sagutin, ha? Yeah, Sophie.
Okay lang po. I was actually before Christian directed me to Ate Jam, I was actually about to go with HTML, an hyperlinks project instead, because I had no idea how the virtual room thing was going to work, and yeah, it was really interesting po, sa brainstorming, because for instance, one of the initial things we had to do, Ate Jam asked me to draw a map of Antipolo, and I decided to draw Antipolo as focusing on the 5 points that I focused on in the actual virtual room, which is where the fragments were, the voice text was situated, and it was already a compressed map.
Okay.
and we compressed it more, and we both agreed to make it sort of a cramped space kasi for one um, for one, Ate Jam brought up how you outgrow places. Places become too small for
Yeah.
you, and that was another interesting thing po, coming back from Makiling and staying here for a long time. And for another, I also thought of it was how you never really you don't ever really get the distance of things right, and your memory of the geography, the placement of things are not always very accurate. So it wasn't even even the things like that that where the collaboration played a big part. Um, Ate Jam was also the one who decided for us to go with illustrations instead of images, since the photographs didn't exactly. I don't think they would have given the same effect and things like that.
Salamat, Sophie. Mirjam, would you like to share anything pertaining to your experience working with Sophie?
Oh, hi guys.
Hello, Jam.
Should I turn on my camera or
Ikaw ang bahala. Kung saan komportable.
wait lang? Hi. What's up? Yeah, I really enjoyed working with Sophia, and parang I think we didn't have had any like difficulties. And I think tapos yun, like the illustrations, I think it made more sense because kasi parang they also look like doodles.
Yeah.
Tapos yeah, and yeah, the map, I think also it's because of like the technicalities then. And then
So parang yung
yeah.
constraints, yung technical constraints,
Mm-mm.
parang part na rin ng
Yeah.
organic na rin to the
Mm-mm.
how it turned out, yeah.
Because we were also like thinking, kasi like since it's a 3D model, we need to think about the size
Yeah.
of the 3D model. Kasi originally it was really big, and then it loaded for like parang I think
Yeah.
it took like 20 minutes to load. So that was really scary. So ayun.
Any thoughts about the burden of parang your task to take part in translating an entirely real milieu, right? Although from memory and although distorted by the technology you're using, the medium you're using, how was it working on that requirement?
First, it was difficult because I didn't know where each each places were, but I think like Google Earth really helped me. Google Street View. So ayun, and then I think I asked Sophia like questions, and then we screen shared.
Okay.
We screen shared because I was asking her kung saan banda yun, like her old elementary school, which was interesting kasi wala na siya.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So,
at
ayun.
times, limited din yung mobility ni Sophie, So talaga
Totoo.
puro through the screens lang talaga. Yeah.
Yun nga, and then maybe kasi like at first I was also thinking of maybe using photogrammetry, where you take 360 pictures of like a location or an object. I was thinking of that, but then the size of the 3D models were really really big, and it would like kill the whole project. So ayun, she even ordered like this parang si Our Lady na
For the
statue.
picture.
Oo. And then yeah, that was really difficult also kasi she needed to like be there and take photos. So ayun. But yeah, I think it was Google Earth that parang maybe like paved the way. Because I think like it made sense when I thought of maybe we can illustrate it. It would look parang, I don't know, maybe it's better if it's not accurate.
Yeah. I guess to put it bluntly, it's more personal, no? Once it got illustrated by the both of you.
True, like it's more human.
Exactly, no? Yung medyo scrawny yung yung lines. And it to me, it adds to the unsettling atmosphere of may dagdag pa doon sa parang fish eye din, may pagka fish eye yung tapos yun nga parang ang blatant na flat naman talaga siya pero nagiging 3D siya, so that adds to the uncanny atmosphere of the place. Ayun, maraming salamat, Jam, sa pag-oo, no? At pagtanggap. Kahit di pa nakukuha yung honorarium mo. Salamat for working with Sophie.
I learned a lot from this project too. I really didn't know how to code before. So I'm win-win situation naman.
Sana hindi ito yung last ninyong collab. Ayun.
Totoo.
Ayun. Salamat, Jam. Nasa Valencia ka ngayon?
Yeah. Thank
siguro,
you.
Salamat, Jam. Salamat. Ayun.
Soft ka na daw.
Maga. Hindi ba, bait kasi sila. Hindi sila buhay. Ayun. Kay Nelvie naman, do you agree na if we are to pin a place, that would be what you remember na tinirhan mo when you were younger? Is it the same house? And is galugarin your way of trying to map your memories of these spaces? So
actually po nung una nasa plano ko po sana ay gumawa sa isang room lang po. Isang room po sa bahay namin na wala pong tao, wala pong rumerenta pa. Pero napaisip din po kung paano ko i-translate po into a virtual like setting. So doon rin po ako nahirapan.
Pag-usapan natin yung virtual na yun mamaya. Sige.
Rin po kasi iniisip ko rin po na kung paano makaka-interact yung audience sa room na sinet ko. Yung place ko po ay it's actually a combination po of the place of the houses I've been into. Okay. Yung una po, yung sa kabilang street lang po, tapos yung ngayon dito po sa bahay. Tapos yung isa po sa eskwelahan ko. Kasi yun po yung tatlong like structures na nag-imprint sa akin the most nung bata po ako. Tapos ayun po, I had to rent another room. So maglalakad pa po ako doon sa sa medyo malapit sa gate ng village po namin. Tapos I had to like collect this objects po from those three places and like dump it there dun sa isang room na yun. And then sa virtual house po, I had to like expand these places into their separate rooms po. Yes po.
Alright. Okay. Salamat, Nelvie. Kay Sydney naman, ayun, same question, ano, like, what could you identify the place you're trying to articulate? And in relation to collaborating with Gab Villos, who's a visual arts major also at the Philippine High School for the Arts, it's interesting, no, to note that um, the images produced by Althea Besamis and Gab Villos are mostly pertaining to objects and not really, illustrating the environment, no, or really actively trying to show or make visible a place, no. So mas objects, no, and so the task of conjuring place falls upon the text, no, the writing, no. Is this something deliberate? And yeah, maybe you could also share insights working with Gab and Althea, towards again conjuring this psychological space of yours in The Body Is You.
When I was thinking of doing the spaces, I had planned to make spaces that were based off of where I had visited when I was younger, like the places that the character visits in the game were also places that I frequented. But also I had my reservations about like actually showing those places. I felt like what was the point of the story, or not really the point, but like what I was trying to convey was how the protagonist, me, is struggling to connect with her own surroundings, and that's why a full place is never really materialized.
Freeze ata si Sydney. Sydney?
Nag-freeze po.
Sydney? Okay. Sige. I'll skip muna to
Opo.
one. Okay. Yeah, Sydney, could you...
Hello
Yeah,
po.
you were... Go ahead, Sydney.
Sorry po. Where did
Sa
I
may materialized part.
what did I say? I'm sorry, I forgot.
Sa part about not yung it's not fully materializing the environment because you can't connect to the world.
Yeah. Like I said, my persona, the character can't really, because the vessel is not non-existent with her. She can't really fully realize the physical world. And even though I had like objects drawn in like short and small rooms, a full environment is not really shown, since she can't really she can't really connect to them, and she can't really comprehend such a full environment. And on the other hand, I also tried to view this space making as like me trying to personally carve a space for myself on this online platform, since sometimes I really felt like even around me in the world, like nahihirapan talaga ako even like going outside or just staying at home. It was really hard for me to still physically realize or physically connect myself. So that's why I tried to also view the space making as a virtual building and a virtual concept.
Okay.
Yeah.
Siguro related din dun sa placemaking ng project, no, syempre yung atmosphere, no, and the project has very evident it has a very eerie atmosphere, no, very reminiscent actually of I'm not sure if it's because of the platform, no, and how most of these games are, either suspense or horror, no. But yeah, I'm curious about the gothic, the gothic, kumbaga parang, yun nga, atmosphere that pervades the work? Where is that coming from, and how is that entwined with the conflict of the persona?
Um, the gothic eerie kind of atmosphere. I was influenced from like watching those short, parang not like concealed kind of horror shows on YouTube. An example of this is like this YouTube channel called Hi, I'm Mary Mary and Local 58. These are like short horror TV shows that are concealed in its environment, but it's still in a virtual realm. And other than that, also the eerie atmosphere was, I guess, I was trying to really convey the kind of wrong kind of feeling when like you're a person, but you do not have like an actual
Okay, yeah.
physical vessel to actually interact with the spaces around you.
Yeah, and that of course neatly ties so much with the fact that it's a virtual project, no? And sa lahat naman ng interface natin with the digital, parang may avatar, no? And that's something that um, the body is also exploiting, right? Um, I'm also curious about the premise, no? The persona doesn't have any memory of their identity, right? Um, so what is that supposed to signify in relation to your personal motivations? And is that amnesia entangled with the trauma you're trying to um, flesh out in the project? Like metaphorically, that loss of memory is signaling this trauma, and so this has to incite the persona into moving and searching and perhaps resolving.
Sir, can you repeat that? Sorry, I
Um,
had po ako.
yung sa yeah, just I guess describe your describe what you were intending for the amnesia in the premise to signify, especially in relation to your personal motivations, and how is this loss of memory um, entangled with the trauma that your project is trying to flesh out?
Mm, the loss of memory was inspired by the modules what we read in grade 10. The story of my body, in which how we also explored the connection one has with returning to oneself, and I guess like I'm trying to entangle that with my own personal motivations. I This is kind of like just my own thing, but whenever I think of trying to erase myself, um, even like before I even thought of the concept of this project, I always thought of like um, it's like getting a blank slate, I guess, and
Yeah,
trying to remove everything about yourself so you could become this new person,
okay.
whether it's like a better version like in the sci-fi stuff, or it's just like you're just trying to become a new person in
Yeah,
general. But then I also tried to explore, I guess, how those memories do define who you are, I
okay.
guess, in a way.
All right. Thank you, Sydney. Yung tanong ko kay Buwan, siguro parang parallel dun sa sinabi ni Nelvie kanina, no? How this virtual house is a consolidation of all the houses she's inhabited, no, in the past, no? And you were very invested, no, dun sa pagiging plural at itinerant ng notion ng home, right? And so what place are you trying to articulate, and um, could maybe you could share insights about this process of consolidating these various homes, and your relationship with with the pastoral tradition, I suppose. No, like how would you describe this pastoral impulse and what uh, went about in terms of deconstructing that pastoral impulse?
So ayun nga po yung one of the main themes of my project was memory and the reconstruction or recalling of memory. So ayun nga, growing up has been these parang miscellaneous places all coming together. So I tried to pay attention to the way that I recall these places that I've lived in. And I guess ano po with focusing on memory as a way to construct my story, nagiging paano ba? Parang nagiging hindi ganun ka, there becomes this disregard, I guess, on the importance of staying faithful to the actual places. And ayun nga, because when you try to recall childhood, di ba po, parang may mga small disconnected specific moments that you remember, and it's never like a whole thing. So that's what I tried to kind of follow. But at the same time, even though there was this regard for staying faithful to these places that I'm trying to recall, may ano pa rin, may parang there's this anxiety, there's this need to still parang ground myself and try to that I think that's where the pastoral aspect comes in. My the persona's constant need to prove that these places are still real and they are existing. And
Parang moorings, no? May moorings pa din. Yeah. Ayun, I would just like to remind the audience, no, na sana you could direct questions to our artists. Maaari kayo magtanong direkta, no, or you could also use the chat box. Ayun, and we'd also love to hear from the creative writing seniors, no, whose projects are also very, very resonant of the same thematic preoccupations explored by the 4 grade 10 Kuwait members. Ayun. So ayun lalo na doon sa mga nakapanood din na part ng audience ngayon, nakapanood bisita na doon sa No True North na projects, no? Maybe you have questions or maybe you have comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts about these 4 projects. Ayun. I'd like to build on what Buwan said, no, yung phrase na staying faithful to the place, no. I guess that's a good transition to the next topic, which is the autobiographical, no, the autobiographical, no, or the fidelity to the quote unquote reality, you know, and of course, you 4 could attest na in the 3 years that we've been together, no, much of our labor in our sessions na ilaan sa pagtatangkang i-dismantle yung quote-unquote creative nonfiction, right? We were trying to really dismantle that and really challenge what nonfiction means, especially in relation to the so-called fictive, no? Ayun. And I guess eventually we finally come to terms with the very productive position na at peace lang, no? Doon sa pagiging neither nor, no, ng fiction at nonfiction, right? So ayun, and your projects are you're very vocal about how you're culling from your personal experiences, your personal histories, right? And we've already been discussing the task of translating place and milieu. So in terms of your bodies, in terms of your personal experiences, personal conflicts, your sexualities, and your relationships, no? Your relationships. how are these autobiographical truths mediated in your respective projects? Ayun. And you could also share perhaps the very long process no ng instruction natin sa autofiction, 'di ba? We spent so much time studying and responding to autofiction modules. So ayun, yung relasyon siguro sa fidelity, sa totoo o sa real, and our broad sympathies, no, a broad range of sympathies for fictional ways of recuperating personal truths. Ayan. So would like to start. Sige, idagdag ko na rin, parang minsanang sagutan na, no? Evident din sa apat, yung parang may gustong-gusto mag-confess, no? May impulse to be exhibitionist, no? In all four projects, no? But at the same time, that is also very actively tempered by a certain quietness and a certain yung nabanggit ko sa inyo nakaraan na very cloistered na paraan din ng pagko-confess, no? So, yung ganung irony, ano, na tahimik, kimi, very defamiliarized, very matipid, no? Very oblique. But at the same time, there is that nagging impulse, no, to confess and be to confess and exhibit. Ayun, Buwan.
Starting with the yung na-mention niyo po na creative nonfiction. I remember nung grade 8 was when you first introduced it to us. Tapos yung preconceptions namin sa creative nonfiction before is ayun nga, creative nonfiction. So it's supposedly faithful on quote-unquote reality, tapos just told in a creative way. Pero throughout the classes where we discussed creative nonfiction and tried to write things under that subject, we discussed a lot about the importance din of memory. Kasi ayun nga, yung creative nonfiction is like supposedly something parang adjacent to parang journalism, but autobiographical journalism.
Remember din ng consensual reality and objectivity.
Opo. So, and parang we were, in the classes, we were trying to challenge the concept of what's real and what's not, and who gets to say what is how you stay faithful to reality, and a lot of the times hindi ina-account for yung importance din ng memory and as well as dreams. I think we discussed dreams a lot din during the classes in being able to construct our personal narratives, and hindi din dapat ini-erase yung unreliability ng memory in telling these personal stories.
Thank you, Buwan. Anyone else? Sidney.
Patagdag lang po kay Buwan. When I was, same with I think all of us, how we thought that creative nonfiction is just like this very descriptive way of describing oneself. And the thing that really stuck with me when you were learning with creative nonfiction back in grade 8 was when you mentioned how every time we revisit a memory, or when you retread a memory, we always change it in its own way. Like what you remember is actually probably way different from what actually happened, and then that's our own reality, and that's our own version of events. It's probably not even real. And I think that concept is what helped inform a lot of our projects. And personally for me, that concept of just changing the memory, changing every time you revisit it, was very helpful in laying the groundwork for most of this project and this capstone.
Okay. Anyone else? Or should we proceed? Yeah, Sophie.
I guess I also think that uh, another aspect of the narrative of what had actually happened, or at least according to someone's memory, another aspect that's important besides the fidelity, if it is no matter how much of it is kept.
Yeah.
Also siguro yung currency po ng memory na yun sa tao, and like I guess for those who deal with for those who are handling works that deal with trauma, for instance, there's yeah, I guess that kind of infidelity and to what had actually happened, um, when you're writing about it, or when you're making art in general about it, it does not it isn't as simple as like calling that lying to yourself.
Okay.
Because it's more complex, and it involves um, rewriting and reimagining also, I guess, more hopeful alternatives, especially since
Exactly.
it's like for a lot of artists that's like
Exactly.
that's another way to cope.
Yeah. Should I proceed? Anyone else? Yeah.
Okay.
Bea, go
Hello po. Ayan. Off-cam lang ako kasi medyo pangit yung signal ko ngayon.
ahead.
Pero, ayun. Pagbati muna sa inyong apat kay Husay. Grabe. Resign na kami. Trust! Anyway, dun lang sa, dahil na nandito na rin tayo dun sa usapin ng creative nonfiction. Tapos, ayun. Ayan. Gusto ko lang siguro itanong sa inyo apat yung parang, of course, no, yung, paano ba to? Creative nonfiction. So there's always a degree of truth to what we write, but also there will always be parang events or parang ayun nga, mga truths na we tend to obscure for, you know, reasons that we don't want to disclose, ganyan. I just wanted to ask siguro if there were narratives in your works that you tended to kind of like blur out a little to para hindi masyado halata for the audience or for the reader, pero it's very evident sa inyo na this is what it actually matters or what it actually means sa inyo. Yes, anyway.
Salamat, Becca. Go. Sinong gustong tumagon doon?
Guys, may 50 pesos sa GCash. Charot!
Which is also very in line with the previous concerns na regarding yun nga, translation, the familiarization, and confession, yung pagiging confessional. Ayun. Anyone? Yes, Buwan.
I guess this isn't like exactly like something that I was trying to hide, or I mean my entire project was has always been trying to obscure everything that's happened in my childhood. So I guess that's pero ano ba? I guess one thing that I really kind of didn't focus on, I don't know if it was deliberate. I think it was kind of unconscious on my part, was how even though my project was focusing on home and the recollection of home, there wasn't exactly too much spotlight on my actual family or my actual parents. I guess yeah, I think lang, that was also my way of trying to make meaning out of things. Na there's just a lot of parts in my personal history that is difficult to articulate. And so parang mas mabuti na you see these parts of the story through the in-betweens of what I'm actually directly telling the audience, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah. A more liminal stance, no? Sidney? Sydney?
Sorry po.
Nelvie?
Similar to what Juan said, I felt like the main character of the story, while like I guess while it's supposed to like also try and be my own kind of stand in, I guess, in that kind of environment that I had built. I also was trying to obscure it, I guess, by not trying to give it by not making it have a personality and by making it invisible. And I think that's just because I don't feel like I owe anyone like an explanation about my own personal narratives. Like I guess my own kind of way of trying to deal with my growing up and the trauma and the bad stuff that I faced was also trying to not really like fully fictionalize it, but adding my own fictional elements to it as a way to like obscure it because well yeah of course I think like maybe I, I think that while like explaining not explaining but like putting it out there was like self helping for me. I really did not want to feel like putting all of my trauma out there. So defamiliarizing it by giving it its own fictional elements just like really helped for me.
And also, I suppose, to an extent, suspicious yung projects around trauma na very, very lucid, very, very pristine, and very articulate, no? Parang, ayun, I guess to an extent, suspicious yung ganong eloquence, right? When it comes to banking on trauma or metabolizing trauma, no? Ayun. Nelvie?
In my case po, yung narratives ko po mainly focus on what the persona sees outside of her. So I always usually tend to avoid using the first persona because I want to like distance myself from myself so I can see so I can like narrate properly kung
Yeah.
kung ano man yung gusto kong masabi because I feel like hindi ko parang hindi maganda sa pakiramdam ko na first person yung nagsasalita. Ayun, so ayun nga, yung narratives ko focus on my family, kung anong nangyari outside of my body, and through that the readers could like figure out what the persona really is through what's happening outside of her. Ayun.
And I think no kahit na evidence sa lahat ng apat yung parang situated sa aftermath yung narrative no at may sense of a very desolate landscape devoid of human presence na may ganong attribute yung lahat na apat ng projects. I suppose doon sa'yo pinaka parang readily discernible yung ganong aspect na parang very forensic, no? Na you just apprehend these objects and these objects become like vessels of information and narrative. All right. Sophie.
Salamat po sa tanong, Ate Becca. Abangan ko po yung 50 sa GP. Joke lang. Family reunion. Yeah. I guess something I feel parang hindi po obscured. I don't think I got to articulate very much about it because I had five fragments, five places, and I deliberately wanted to keep these fragments sort of as like the source of warmth within yan nga po because I've been told that yeah it does give off a very unsettling feeling and it's
Ghost Town.
Devoid of people and everything, so I wanted to keep that tension. So something I feel like I wasn't able to talk about much is I guess grief, the grief and the absence of being in this being in this place as recalled from memory, but never actually being able to return to it. Pati po siguro yung like yung tensions ngayon ng buong like during the entire process, which was something I kept thinking about kasi I am at home, but I it still feels sort of detached. And the only time I was able to revisit the places I wrote about was when I was doing the field work.
Yeah.
So yun po.
Ganda nun. And do you also see the project as also doubling as a eulogy for your grandmother, or it's more like a personal narrative, almost tribute? You also see it as doubling as this tribute to her.
Yeah, yes, that's I guess that's another thing. But I had written about her as if she were gone, and then that's sort of I guess that's also sort of a good like a good way for it to appear, because I think that way na underline po talaga na she's like I'm not as much as I'm not as in contact with her as I used to be.
Okay.
But
A good word perhaps
yeah.
to describe it would be a rehearsal, no? Parang siyang rehearsal.
Yeah.
Yung grief na yun. Or in the morning.
Yeah. Opo. So I guess initially when I decided to write about this, I actually wanted it to be centered on besides Antipolo. I wanted for because I also similarly to Nelvie, I also tried to keep it at a distance just because that's what I'm sort of used to, and it sort of worked that through the virtual room, the audience would assume sort of my voice would they would sort of serve as like a host po. And then here they are acquiring my memories through the sound and the illustrations, the landscape. But ayun nga po, I kind of wanted to also for the grief to be there for one, for losing losing my grandmother when she hasn't even passed away yet, and also something that I didn't really talk much about, losing my dad 2 years ago, and there's like only a single fragment about that. But yeah, it's these things are something I'm looking forward to getting to write more about, especially since this project has also served as to sort of push me towards being more vulnerable with what I put out.
Anyone else before we proceed to the next point? Ayun, in line din sa tanong ni Bea, ni Bianca, at sa mga sagot ninyo, like, I suppose for older generations of student writers, mas madaling sagutin yung ano yung sinusulat mo. Yung tanong na sinusulat, parang poetry, short fiction, ganyan. Creative non-fiction, parang daling sagutin, would you say na at this point, if you're asked the same question, parang mas mahirap siyang sagutin, or hindi kayo ganun ka-komportable na sabihin, short fiction, ganyan, or prose, parang ganun, or and also that's in line with the fact that these 4 projects are very obviously intermedial, no? You are the third, I suppose this is the third batch of creative writing majors na na hindi publication per se, no? Hindi chapbook. Ayun, hindi book format, hindi chapbook format yung proyekto. Exhibition yung piniling platform, tapos nag-enjoy na maraming media, no? Primarily sound, moving image, and images, no? Still images. Ayun. So I guess magandang simulan yung discussion na to by acknowledging that, and Adam is here, no? Adam, we for the first time, the creative writing program at the PHSA offered graphic literature, no, in 2018, I think, no, 2018, tama ba? And Adam is the first, and until now he's the one handling the course. He teaches graphic literature to several grades in creative writing junior high school, no. Salamat sa pagdalo, Adam. Ayun, so gusto kong simulan yung discussion doon ano na since despite the variety of texts you've gotten exposed to, no, in cultural studies, in advanced workshop in composition, na hindi siya limited sa mga nasusulat sa papel, no. Despite that, wala naman talaga tayong subjects na tinuturuan kayo sa creative process na naglalahok ng ibang media apart from text-based practices, no? So, ang pinakamalapit na talagang initiation dyan ay yung course na tinuturo ni Adam, no, which is graphic literature, no? So, we could comment on that, how this, I guess, establish a groundwork of sorts, no, for this very intermediate pursuit, no, in no True North, because I suppose at its core, graphic literature is primarily that, no, yung maraming possibilities ng interface ng text at ng imahen, ano. So maybe you guys could talk about that and your experiences working with disciplines, no, and media beyond conventional creative writing. Would like to start? Yes, Buwan.
Yeah, I think it definitely the introduction of graphic literature in the curriculum definitely opened up to a lot more alternatives. Ayun kasi in the class, Sir Adam would extensively discuss comics to us, and he would give us activities then where we would write and draw our own comics. And other than that, I think also kasi we were grade 8 when Cuentos. I think Cuentos was grade 10 and they were doing their capstone. And that was the first time na ayun nga, creative writing majors did a year-long project that wasn't wasn't entirely focused on making a publication. And seeing those kinds of different options, I think definitely encouraged like all of us to even other batches to explore more in not just writing books.
Thank you, Buwan. Who else? Sidney, please.
It's not actually graphic lit that I want to talk about. It was grade 8, and we were doing. It was also the same year where the grade 10 had Quantos had branched out and done their non-text exhibits, but we had also done independent publishing, and that was actually one of my first encounters with doing a project. Yeah, that Facebook profile I made with Kuya Iya, who's here. That was also one of my first encounters with doing a work that wasn't primarily text-based, and the inclusion of graphic literature the following year, because that was when we did graphic literature, helped to encourage, help encourage me to branch out even further into non-text-based or non-book-based projects.
Okay. Sophie?
Personally po, I really enjoyed Sir Adam's graphic lit classes because first year lang po kami nagkaroon ng elective sa PHSA, and I chose illustrations, and I didn't get to and with all the requirements I didn't get to have enough time po, and I really enjoyed that. I got to explore this and for fun, and just in general I think for both graphic lit and independent publishing, leading up to the capstone, I think we're always kind of searching for different ways say things other than written text. And this definitely working on our capstones was
Mhm.
a good opportunity to be able to explore that.
Okay. Um, so, ano na rin lang tayo na dun sa pagbangga sa very orthodox na mga bagay sa creative writing like CNF, a wholly text-based output, what else? Categories, no? Uh, how do you guys feel about how do I say this? How do you describe your relationship with canonical literature, right? Whatever that means. Also, I guess, judging from your previous and even current exposure to a whole range of other literatures, no, and media, no. So, how would you describe your relationship with the so-called important literature, no? Ayun. And especially in relation to how you guys have been deviating from these conventions. Anyone? Okay, Sophie and then Buwan.
I think in our classes po, it for our batch, it was a very, we really appreciated the flow of how things went. Kasi po nung first year we had Ma'am Ray, and she was able, and she laid down the foundations, the basics of traditional writing. And in grade 8, we had both you and Ma'am Ray, and it was really helpful to shift between learning more about the conventions, and then in your class po, learning how to experiment with them, how to break them, and ayun po, I
And
and I think
how is
that
that handy or useful for your intentions for this particular project?
yeah, I think that 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 kind of space, that kind of structure was helpful to us, because you can't. I think it's difficult to be to experiment with new mediums, and to experiment in general with writing and with art if you if you aren't if you don't have the foundations to sort of
Yeah.
guide you and know how far to stray away from them, what exactly works. And I think in our classes, but we've always been, despite being in, yeah, being under being a creative writing class under formal education, there's always been more room for us to be to explore the different things that we could do besides besides tradition and conventions.
Okay. Thank you, Sophie. Buwan.
Continuing lang din from what Sophie said, I think being able to, being familiar with both conventional rules in writing and knowing also the kind of options that we have in breaking these rules, provide us with a lot of tools actually. Hindi siya kailangan na parang nagko-conflict na mga
Yeah.
ideas, because there's a lot of ways to mix them together to
Yes.
make something new. And I think that it's also applicable in my personal experience in na ano, it's also applicable with exploring other art forms, because I think the reason why I chose to explore not only text but image and video in my project was because a lot of my a lot of what I wanted to execute, a lot of the visions that I wanted to portray, parang hindi na kayang ma-accommodate ng text lang. So
Yeah.
with these yung lahat ng natutunan namin in the 4 years of formal education in creative writing, I think was very useful in parang applying in not just ay nga text-based
Yeah.
na outputs.
lalo na siguro yung sa kaso nung yung paghawi ng pagbuo ng paghawi na parang you have been very deliberate about wanting to sustain this friction among these various disparate parts, no? Na talagang makikita mo na na integral talaga dun sa experience ng reader yung pagiging inconsistent nung forms, no, or nung media na nilahok, no, dun sa ayun, at yung pagiging interrupted niya, consistently interrupted niya, no, which reminds me because all four artists also manifested this tendency, this predilection for fragmentation, no, and you were all kind of resisting continuity, no. So there's that emphasis in disruption, no, pagpa-fragment, yung pagiging jarring, ayun. So at yung in relation to the past points that we've raised also, no, yung pag-resist din sa pagiging legible ng kanya-kanyang akda, no, and that's very in line with Becca's question and all the talk about fidelity and the familiarization, no. So yeah, how is this resistance to articulateness and legibility productive for your respective cases? Anyone?
I think that's where the title for our collective project po comes into the discussion, No True North, because in the idea of kasi a map tapos may may constructions na where it's oriented or where things fall, and the reason why we chose No True North is because all of these projects are trying to parang reconfigure already laid rules, not only in our personal histories, but I guess it also applies to the artistic forms that we chose to to use.
Okay, yeah. Anyone else? Baka may, at this point, baka may mga questions tayo from the audience. It might be nice to hear from members of the audience. May tanong ba or comments or mga puna? And also, I'd like to note that this is the first time that the PHSA recitals have been conducted entirely virtual, no? Entirely virtually, no? Across all disciplines. And yeah, I'd love to hear from you guys if you initially saw that as a problem or from the get-go it was part of the constraints, part of the prompt, so to speak. And medyo na pahagingan nyo na rin naman na kanina na when you were still 7th graders, parang yung idea pa lang din ay chapbook yung gagawin, publication, ganyan, and now parang everyone's obliged to adapt, no, to the virtual, no, and everything has to be digital, and all the constraints that go with that requirement, no. So yeah, how was it, and also as members of the audience who got to watch Durongawan, no, not only as producers, not only as artists of No True North, pati yung pagtunghay ninyo sa mga exhibitions nina Danny, nina Meg, nina Becca, no, sa mga senior creative writing recitalists. So how would you what insights could you share to us about intercourse with the virtual? Yeah. Sydney.
I guess at least personally for me for my project, I didn't really view the virtual constraint as really a constraint. I kind of thought of it as maybe like just like you said, Bod, a prompt for me, and really pushed me into trying to reconfigure my work as something that was not non-text based. Since even when I was in grade 7, grade 8, I wasn't really interested in making my story a chapbook because I don't like reading. And I haven't read a real book in like years. And so like this push towards making something that's like fragmented and not like the one that you mentioned before, Nina, the canonical literature. I guess that the virtual constraint really like helped me to reconsider all my different options and even though we explore for things that I might prepare for in the future, like for my thesis and beyond.
Wow. Thanks, Sidney. Anyone else? And also looking back, no, parang masaya ba kayo na ito yung kinahinatnan? Or di nakulong, kumbaga, no, sa digital at virtual? Sophia, then Buwan.
And another interesting another thing that I found interesting, with not only like our exhibits in our projects, but also in general for the other recitalists in other majors. Though the technical difficulties and the concerns regarding the virtual platform were all concerning, and they did serve as obstacles during the making of every single production po, I'm sure. I also liked that meant the audience could experience like an entirely different could have an entirely different experience of the projects depending on things, even things like how big their screen is, or how the project appears on their device. At naging magandang solution po dun talaga yung pagkakaroon ng premiere videos. But yes, which I appreciated. And yeah. Yun po.
Thank you, Sophie. Nelvie?
Ayun po. Initially po, ayun nga, sa isang physical room po sana yung dati ko pong pinaplano. Kasi gusto ko pong may kinakalikot yung kamay ko, tapos gumagalaw po ako. Ayun, so I think I had a hard time like reformatting it and translating it into a virtual space. Kasi I also wanted like people to physically interact with the objects po, with the text. Pero I think na kasi parang kailangan na nasa virtual. I think kasi ayun din po, may collaborator din ako. So I didn't really know how HTML works po, so I had to rely on her po. So parang na-limit din po yung kung ano yung gusto ko pa po gawin. Yes po. Opo. So
Tapos,
parang
Tapos foreigner pa.
Opo. Pero ayun, hindi ko po na-maximize yung gusto ko pong pwedeng gawin. So, so ayun po, base dun po sa experience ko, parang na-prompt na rin po ako na to learn more about coding po. So, I can like do it myself po.
Oo. Tsaka papunta na rin naman na talaga dyan eh. So, go lang. Tsaka may pera dyan. Ano? At this point, Nelvie, are you saying na had the circumstances been more fortunate, mas ideal pa rin talaga yung physical exhibition in your case?
Yes po. Pero ayun din nga po, kasi hindi po nga ako yung nakapag-code. Kaya na-limit din po ako sa
simulan mo na para sa senior high thesis.
Yes po, sir.
Boom na. Buwan.
I definitely didn't think po na na parang masama na bagay yung pag-adjust namin sa virtual na exhibit. But it was also a little bit frustrating in the beginning of the school year because yung plano ko po talaga sana is, ayun, parang similar din kay Nelvie na isang room.
Yeah.
And it was supposed to be parang an entirely black room, tapos projector.
So it's
And because
it's an immersive, like an immersive installation. Yeah.
Opo, kasi I really wanted to ayun po, put the audience in like within the experience. So kasi very important nga for me the sensory experience in viewing the project. So I guess one of my difficulties with executing my capstone was trying to tawag dyan, kind of translated experience onto a
Yeah.
website.
Na medyo flat, no?
Opo, it was, yeah. And I think I was able to come close to the kind of experience that I wanted the audience to see. Pero ayun nga, it would still have been much better kung physical, if they were like physically in the space that I wanted them to be in.
Yun nga, fingers crossed, no? Come grade 12, balik na tayo sa bundok. At pwede na ulit. Siguro, itanong ko na din yung yung kanya-kanyang relasyon ninyo sa realism. Siguro, makikita natin sa apat na exhibitions in varying degrees yung pag-deviate, no, sa or pag-create ng sariling realism, no? I don't know if, of course, every work creates its own verisimilitude, no? Pero I get what I'm saying, no, na ayun, I guess may varying degrees ng proximity, no, sa consensual na, more or less consensual na realism, no? Siguro pinakamalapit na, no, kahit na remote pa yung proximity na yun, siguro yung kay Sophie at yung kay Nelvie, no? At yung kay Buwan at yung kay Sidney talagang deliberately gustong labusawan yung realism na yun. Ano? Pero yun nga, kahit yung kay Sophia tsaka kay Nelvie, para kang naglo-lucid dream pa din, ano? Or para kang dinidelirio. Yung kay Nelvie parang may ganong feeling na parang nagdidelirio ka kahit na gaano ka syrupy, no? Kahit gaano ka syrupy at ka dainty ng graphics, ng music, no? Parang nagdidelirio ka pa rin, ano? You're not exactly in this recognizably na very realist na na narrative or experience, no? So yun, can we hear your thoughts or your thoughts about your relationship with realism, not only with these projects but also over the years leading to this?
Sir, ako po ba?
Lahat. Pero go ahead, Nelvie. Go ahead.
Ayun, kaya po siguro nagustuhan ko po yung classes na CNF and autofiction po kasi ayun, I get to like control how the lines are ayun nga blurred between fiction and reality. Ayun, I get to blur the stuff na ayokong like outright na sabihin. Pero at the same time, parang napaprompt po ako na ibunyag na lahat kasi may parang harang pa rin po. I guess that's it for now po.
Okay, salamat Nelvie sa pagbahagi nun. Buwan.
I think throughout my first 4 years po in PHSA, I've always constantly been trying to I've always been interested in writing things related to surrealism. And I think also partly also because of the kind of media that I'm interested in relating to art production. mainly, I guess, the things that I like most, that resonate with me most as an artist are Satoshi Kon's films like
Yeah.
Paprika and Tokyo Godfather's Perfect Blue. And on the other spectrum is Studio Ghibli films na mas more focus kasi Satoshi Kon's films are a lot very psychedelic, very psychological, very confusing. It's the
Yeah.
films are always like blurring certain lines, and in Studio Ghibli films, it's more focused on things that are tangible, and there's a fixation on things that mundane things. There's a lot of attention to detail. So I guess that influences me a lot. Those parang polar qualities influences me a lot in how I depict reality in my works na ayun nga parang very ambiguous but also trying to ground on like tangible things.
Okay, salamat Buwan. Sophie, please go ahead.
As for me po, with realism, I guess I noticed that my writing doesn't really stray too far from it, because I find that um, I'm not I the most I can um, do is like distort like perceptions and um, distort images and um, things like that. But never been good with writing anything other writing anything that is very um, that is specific, for instance, for um, things that get too fictional.
Yeah.
Besides making a little fabrications here and there, but so yeah.
All right. Sydney?
As as for me naman po, I guess looking back at all the works that I've created, I think like a recurring theme is like taking something that has happened to me or has happened in my reality, but then like I guess I like to twist it, or I guess I like to filter it and write it as in a way it's more like in a dream quality or in a
Or
more
absurd, no?
memory quality, and it's more abstracted. And I guess it's just how I choose to face my own uh my own reality with things, since I like to run away from things. Char. I like to I just like to like imagine different things that would happen to me, but also still somewhat grounded in what's happening to me now.
All right. Yeah, before I think I'm down to my last concern, ano? So I'd really appreciate if members of the audience could um add to the pool of questions, although it's already getting late na din naman. But before I proceed with my last question, have we covered more or less what we've planned to cover, guys?
Yes, but
Well, although we've never really talked about, gender and sexuality na, pero huwag na lang siguro. Ano, would you like to venture into that? Ayun, siguro nabanggit na rin lang yun, identity politics, no, or yung subject possession ninyo, na doon talaga nakamuhon yung mga proyekto, no. Yung tanong ko next in relation to your in view of your relationship with realism, no, yung mas mahirap siguro yung tanong, no, ay yung relasyon ninyo with political realities, no, or in view of more deliberately political writing, because we've been together for semesters, no, sa cultural studies, diba? And I myself could attest to how you four are, very engaged, no, and very critical despite the limitations of, your privilege and age, no. I could attest to how how aware you are, about the material conditions, despite our respective limitations. And yun nga, yung mga projects ninyo, like for example in Sophie's case or Buwan's case, the very task of trying to translate an aspect of milieu is of course already a very political gesture, right? But of course you know what I mean, no? Yeah, hindi ko alam yung tanong, no, but I guess we need to address that elephant, so to speak, no, na especially now, no, that we are in a very fraught and strange period, no, na compounded hindi lang ng pandemic, no, kundi at hindi lang ng pasistang gobyerno, no, maraming aspects, no, hindi lang sa Pilipinas, no, parang compounded ng maraming bagay sa buong mundo, no, and yet we are, siguro yung tanong ko yung level of ease then, or gaano kayo komportable, no, to be quote-unquote selfish o i-accord yung ganong espasyo na para i-sort out muna yung mas personal, yung mas privado, no, despite your awareness and criticality of the things going around, no, and also not just limited to your capstone projects, no? Like in general, because wala naman akong na-encounter din, no, sa Kuwit na talagang masasabing deliberately political, no? That's a problematic phrase, no, but yeah, for the sake of convenience, no, yun, wala mas naglilin din sa personal, no. Does that, you think that has a lot to do with your the fact that you're young, and nga, kailangan magsimula muna sa privado at sa personal, and maybe this is where we share about our own ideological stance, no, in relation to our craft. Anyone? Yes, Buwan.
I think that's always a concern din po that we always discuss in class din, na it's definitely a privilege, especially now na the country is in
Yeah.
a state of emergency, that the four of us were still able to take the time to contemplate and be
Yeah.
able to take the time to produce a full-fledged project. That's that's definitely and there's I think all artists in some way or another experience this kind of anxiety na bakit could why should I have the space to do this for myself? And I guess it's a very complicated conversation po,
Yeah.
pero at the same time we are also drawing from our experiences as an active part of the milieu that we live
Yes.
in, if
Yes.
that makes sense. No matter how personal the art that we make is, it's unavoidable, it's inevitable that this is informed in by everything that's happening
Yes.
around us.
It will always have that like documentary dimension to it, no?
Opo. And I guess that's where my anxiety comes from, na even though a lot of my works are very obscure and very surreal, there's that anxiety to also keep it grounded, because I also have an obligation not to disconnect myself from where I'm living in.
Salamat, Buwan. Sophie?
Ayun, to add to Buwan po, yeah, I agree with what he said, and I do think that because certainly, despite even though I guess you could say, like, all of us in one way or another through the process of our works, we were dealing with sorts of trauma po in producing these. There's still some sort of being comfortable in that po. Kasi nga po nailunsad namin yung mga proyektong to. but despite also being anxious about this this concern, I also um, I also understand that I acknowledge that I guess a difficulty po is that what is deliberately political is usually linked to what is blatant and to what is outright, and these are it's admittedly really difficult po to write a work that is deliberately political, and from you can tell already is a critique in itself, and still be and still I guess remain l- literary in the sense that mahahanay po siya sa mga trabahong pinapasa ng um, pinapasa ng iba at works that we read. It's a difficult quality to emulate, and I think that personally po my solution has been um, it's helped a lot to become organized. Kasi sa pagiging organisado, there's always the collectivizing of these kinds of things. And ayun nga po, yun din po sinabi ni Buwan, hindi po talaga mahiwalay yung political yung political state, yung material conditions mula sa mga trabaho namin, because there's always going to be for instance class, no matter what you're writing about, and yeah, yun po.
Thank you, Sophie. Tsaka yun nga, yung nabanggit mo sa yung sa pag-organize, no? Yung attentiveness, no? Which is a very fundamental attentiveness, no? Sydney and Nelvie, would you like to weigh in? Yes, Sydney, go ahead.
I guess for me, it's always, I guess, I don't want to sound like those people like, oh, it's so hard being woke or political, but I guess it's always been like, I've always tried to be aware of my privilege, I guess, because like, I know how privileged I am, especially in these times, and I guess I do feel I do feel the anxiety that the others have mentioned on why am I like being able to do this while there's probably people who are like not being able to even like go on with their own life because of the failing economy, the government, blah blah blah. But I try to like, I guess, similar to Sophie, I try to be organized, and I guess like what I try not to do is not like, it's like you know, there's those people who are like, oh, I'm not going to I think like I'm not going to be able to talk about any of these things because I'm not this person or haven't experienced those. But similar to what the others have said, everything political still informs the work, even if like it's not directly about that. Like just being in this environment or being Filipino or being of this class or this gender or this race, it still carries this connotation. Like what I write is very different, vastly different from like what a white cishet man would write.
Yeah, precisely. Although iniisip ko din na it also shouldn't, that kind of stance shouldn't make us complacent. No, may danger din kasi ng complacency doon na yung sa pagiging default, no, pagiging given ng and it shouldn't keep us from being more proactive, I suppose. Sophie.
I just like to add po that even doing work within and joining your own local organization for actual a movement, it really helps to ease these anxieties kasi na-realize mo po na art like produced for example in the case of the Ibarang po, art produced like for these major projects does not always have to be deliberately political, so long as you understand that you still have our responsibility
Yes.
to uphold, and you have to constantly have other platforms of ensuring that these are met. And ayun nga po, being part of of an organization really helps to ease these, because it keeps you involved still, and yun, with the collective struggle, it really becomes easier.
Sophie, that reminds me, na despite the ethical baggage of art making, parang productive din na pag-isipan kung dapat bang monopoly ng art, yung ganong burden, ayun. Yeah, ang ganda nga na nabanggit mo na may ibang collective action na Buwan.
Yun din po sana yung point ko na sinabi niyo at saka ni Sophie, na kasi there's a tendency din for artists to get so caught up in the field that they're focusing in, na we don't realize na, for example, me, writing isn't going to be the best form of activism that I can turn to, and there's a lot of other alternatives, and I don't need to box myself in that. And I definitely have the responsibility to be involved in these issues.
Yes.
So yun po, I don't really think that writing is going to be my main platform for
And you suppose that awareness also tethers you in a way that keeps you from being delusional, right? About the capacities of art, right? Especially given our context. It always reminds there are other more potent, perhaps there are other more potent technologies, for these needs. Sydney? Sophie.
That lang, sir. I was just thinking like how I remember like when I was like seventh grade, or even before that, people would always say like, oh, what are you gonna do? How are you going to display your art in a way that will help the future? That's like yung mga dancers, they'll be like, oh, I will dance or something, and then I always like found that the kind of like some kind of a weird question, especially since, while of course art can help in raising awareness, sometimes it feels like you're trying to burden yourself with representing, and yun nga po, binanggit mo po na there are there are better ways to actually help with your activism.
Thank you, Sydney. Yeah, oo nga, Sophie, yung long-standing conversation on idealism and materialism. Other points? Baka may gustong mag-share sa audience or magtanong. Okay, it's almost 10:30. May gusto bang magtanong or magbahagi? So kung wala na siguro, I'd like to hear from you guys. Yung apat, kung may mga pahabol pa or final words. This is our last session technically, before you finally embrace the sem break, and then be senior high school students. Any last words na gusto niyo ibahagi patungkol sa proseso ninyo at sa mga proyekto ninyo? And what now, where to? Wala na, wala gusto magpahabol.
We're gonna miss you, sir.
Wag dito, mamaya na. Huwag tayo magkalat. Wala na ba? Yeah, I'm really very grateful, for you guys deciding to push through with this conversation. And I'm so glad na sustain natin yung kahit may mga nawawalang audience, sustain natin na almost 50 members ng audience. I'm very, very thankful to everyone who took time to join us tonight. and listen to these amazing authors, amazing artists. Yeah, I can't wait to see what you'd be churning out for your senior exhibitions. No, congratulations. Dami ko natutunan sa inyo sa 3 taon na magkakasama tayo. No, I'm very grateful for the company, no, and all those exchanges. No, salamat. Congrats. Ayun.
Salamat po.
Thank you. I'm gonna miss you guys.
Thank you, sir.
Ulitin ko lang, no, na maaari ninyong bisitahin yung mga proyekto ni na Buwan, Nelvie, Sophia at Sidney sa linktr.ee/Kuwit. And please follow Kuwit on Facebook at facebook.com/KuwitHSA and Kuwit Official on Instagram. Ayun. We will be sharing the recording of this roundtable as well on Facebook. Maraming salamat sa lahat na naging bahagi, no, ng instruction, ng tuition, ng mga taon na binuno ng 4 na recitalists natin. Si Adam na naging guro din nila, na maraming salamat. At sa iba pang nandito sa collaborators, na kay Gab, kay Mirjam. Ayun, maraming salamat kay Denise, no, na advisor ni Danny. Ayun, salamat din sa 3 senior creative writing majors, no, si Danny, Meg at Becca, na I'm sure naging inspirasyon, naging lodi ng ating mga grade 10 recitalists, no. Ayun, I'm very, very happy, no, to be taking part in this, and to be, ika nga ni Jam when I first suggested yung collab between Sophie and Jam, no. Sabi ni Jam, ano bang pinadede ng mga magulang yan sa kanila, no, at kay Huhusay. Ayun, so thank you. Ingat po sa lahat. At magandang gabi. Bye-bye.
Maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat po sa pagdalo.
Salamat po.
Thank you, guys.
Maraming salamat.